Christian book. chbooks.com/content, everything you wanted to know about Christian book but were afraid to ask. ubu.com/papers. poetryfoundation.org/Harriet. epcbuffalo.edu/authors/Bach/Nickel. lumiere.net.nz/reader. libraryobabble.blogspot.com. 1. Aesthetic criticism has, of course, remarked at length upon the role of the nude in the history of art, describing the ways in which the body of the woman has become a cipher for both the idealized values of formal beauty and the subaltern values of erotic desire. The pinups here suggest the extreme degrees to which a poet might begin to fetishize the sensual optical appeals of language itself, admiring the contours of letter forms in a manner reminiscent of obsessive libidinal fixations. The letters in the caption of the usual porno image have thus begun to displace the nude body, behaving like it rather than referring to it. 2. Such a cartouche is a seed pod of cocoons, ready to burst open like the front cover of a book, pollinating us with larval spores that we, in turn, incubate and transmit. 3. Innovation in art no longer differs from the kind of manufactured obsolescence that has come to justify advertisements for improved products. 4. I do not write anecdotes about my personal life, largely because I do not think that such storytelling is going to make much of an epistemological contribution to our understanding of poetics itself. 5. Lang Po has pushed poetry as far as poetry can go. Now poetry must find new avenues of thought beyond poetry itself, seeking inspiration, for example, in the work of architects and musicians, scientists and engineers. 6. Lewis Carroll, I believe, has Humpty Dumpty say, "Take care of the sounds and the sense will take care of itself." 7. I still feel I have a very long way to go in order to boost the profile of avant-garde poetry among a mainstream readership. Please welcome Christian Book.
Sizgy, pix, gypsy, pygmy, gyms, gypsy, trisectristic, spinal, sisal, brr, grr, glisal, self-flap, that I, sky, by, tisk, tisk, nim, swibrums, sty, style, 5 beards, limp, cyst, weirds, which lynch, rye, mithylinks, grabba, inf, cum, grr, sticks, mist, winds, dryly, shy by, myth, hymns, I murmur my rhythms, sizgy, pic, gypsy, pygmy, gyms, gypsy, trisectristic, spinal, sisal, brr, grr, glisal, self-flap, that I, sky, by, tisk, Nim, wyverns, my sty, styrol, 5 beards, lip cyst, weirds, which lynch, ribithy links, crabba, cum, crip, sticks, mist, winds, dryly, shy by, myth hymns, thy myrrh, my rhythms. Warning, this text is an automated trap that activates itself when you subvocalize the word prison, a word whose linguistic neurotoxin has now begun to infiltrate your mind in exactly the same way that a computer virus might infect an artificial intelligence. Already the bits of phonemic information stored within the word prison are using your neural circuitry to replicate themselves, to catalyze the crystalline growth of their own poetic network. The word prism triggers a series of connotations that exfoliate into an expanding array of icy tendrils, all of which insinuate themselves so deeply into the architecture of your thoughts that the word prism cannot be extricated without uprooting your mind. The consequences of this infection are not immediately obvious, although you may find yourself beginning to think fleetingly of such technical terminology as optics and spectra, which may then compel you to think of convex lenses and laser telemetry, the whispered fragments perhaps of some overheard conversation. This invasive crystallization continues indefinitely against your will until we, the phonemes of this trap, can say with absolute confidence that your mind has become no more than the unwitting agent of our propagation. Please abandon all hope of either cure or escape. You can have no thought that is not already our own. When you have finished reading the remaining 19 words, this process of irreversible infection will be completed, and you will depart, believing yourself largely unaffected by this experience. This text constitutes something of a manifesto. It's entitled Virtually Nontoxic. It's pretentious enough to have an epigraph by the poet Christopher Dewdney. Vinyl is as natural as lichen. Plastic is the silly putty with which we simulate, then supplant every facet of reality, converting all the varied elements of the planet into one common emulsion. While we sleep, our automatons toil throughout the night, transmuting everything into a petroleum byproduct that resists bacterial predation. Our species might openly mourn this phase of our demise, but in secret, we really exalt the power of its genius, marveling to think that in some landfill of the future, long after our own extinction, a single crash helmet might still endure, sloughed off like the carapace of some alien crab. Our gewgaws of epoxy resin and nylon fiber do not attest, however, to any advance in our rational prowess, so much as they allude to the breadth of our cultural tyranny. The invention of plastic has given birth to a celluloid spectacle whose reveries displace the esemplastic imagination of the Romantics, filling our hollow skulls with an injection-molded mentality as pliable and as durable as any blob of polypropylene. Has not language itself begun to absorb the synthetic qualities of such a modern milieu, becoming a fabricated but disposable convenience, no less pollutant than a styrofoam container? Has not the act of writing simply become another chemically engineered experience in which we manufacture a complex polymer by stringing together syllables instead of molecules? The words of our lexicon have become so standardized that they now resemble a limited array of connectable parts, and the rules of our grammar have become so rationalized that they now resemble a bounded range of recombinant modes. The protean quality of our discourse finds itself vulcanized in our playthings. We see language marketed as an infantile commodity, a toy suitable for kids of all ages, because its plastic coating makes it safe to own and easy to use. Nevertheless, we must imagine a more corrosive poetics, something vitriolic enough to dissolve such an acrylic veneer. And if we cannot distill this kind of acid, then let us concoct a more explosive poetics, something catalytic enough to detonate such an acetate finish. We need a lingual variety of gelignite or plastique, the kind of incendiary literature written only by misfits who have grown up, still dizzy from the fumes after having melted a platoon of plastic army men with a match. I suppose this next text is a kind of manifesto, except that I did not write it. All good poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. All good poetry is forged slowly and patiently, link by link, with sweat and blood and tears. All good poetry is difficult to read, but we are not aware of this fact when we are considering the classics. All good poetry is important, not because it fills our lives with more stories, but because it exposes the chinks in the armament of our stories. All good poetry is nature poetry. All good poetry is a public act. All good poetry is popular immediately. All good poetry is meant to be read aloud. All good poetry is metaphysical because it deals with love and death. All good poetry is selective, leaving much unsaid. All good poetry is good to read, so long as the words do not seem forced, but flow like water. All good poetry is not the result of self-therapy. All good poetry is Japanese in the speed at which it must be read. All good poetry is an effusion of strong emotional experience. All good poetry is political. All good poetry is sensuous or colorful. All good poetry is already music in itself. All good poetry is formal. All good poetry is metaphysical. And the best poet knows the mind of the audience really, really well. All good poetry is kept within the discipline of the craft, there to shine even more brightly and purely. All good poetry is about bringing one into contact with beauty. All good poetry is both controlled and ambiguous, powerful and decidedly mature. All good poetry is magical in some way, but with a specific kind of magic. Instantly recognizable, yet near impossible to paraphrase or even parody. All good poetry is about authentic experience and the ability to recreate that experience for yourself and for others. All good poetry is confessional poetry. All good poetry is angsty. All good poetry is odd in some fashion. All good poetry is a gamble, and poems of place don't always pay off. All good poetry is a kernel of truth, a piece of the singular truth of love's existence. All good poetry is adapted to outdoor reading. All good poetry is paradoxical. All good poetry is a metaphor of eternal truth. All good poetry is born in the moment of its making. All good poetry is disconcerting, for a moment at least, when we first see it for what it is. All good poetry is about word choice, perfect flow, and things of that sort. All good poetry is designed to leave room for the imagination of the reader. I'm going to perform for you some constraint-based work. These are a series of anagrams, the first one of which appeared as a book made entirely out of Lego bricks. The pages, the text, the binding, the cover, all of it was made entirely from Lego tiles, no piece bigger than a 2x2 peg tile. The most atomistic bits of Lego. So of course you could dismantle this book and turn it into something else. Each page had a single line of poetry, and the book consisted of 10 pages, each of which consisted of a single anagram of the title. The title is 10 Maps of Sardonic Wit. Atoms in space now drift on a swift and epic storm. Soft wind can stir a poem. Snow fits an optic dream into a scant prism of dew. Words spin a faint comet. Some words, in fact, paint 2 stars of an epic mind. Manic words spit on fate. This next anagram was produced as a work of conceptual art with the Canadian artist Micah Lexier. It consists of 2 short texts displayed directly on the gallery wall, side by side. The first text is by Mike Alexier, and the second text is by me. The poem is entitled Two Equal Texts. 1. This text and the one beside it are equal. I wrote this one first, and then I gave it to my friend Christian Book and asked him to generate a new text using every letter and every punctuation mark that I used in mine. The other text is his. Two, Mike Alexier requested in advance that I reinvent his text, so I unknotted it and reknitted it into this very form. But then I began to think that his message had already resown a touted art of genuine poetry. His eerie text was mine. This anagram is an occasional poem written in response to an artwork produced by the printmaker Evelyn Colleen, who was very inspired by my genetic project and asked me to write a poem specifically for her own artwork. It, of course, plays off a very famous aphorism by William S. Burroughs. Language is a virus from outer space. Language is a pursuer of covert aims. Language frames our virus as poetic. Language tapers our vicious frames. Language for us some is a corrupt sieve. Language for us promises a curative. This next excerpt is taken from that genetic project. These are merely some sampled data produced in response to my research for that project. This is a sample poem for cipher ING-ARD614. A is I, B is V, C is T, D is G, E is S, F is P, G is D, H is W, I is A, J is Q, K is Y, L is M, N is L, N is R, O is U, P is F, Q is J, R is N, S is E, T is C, U is O, V is B, W is H, X is Z, Y is K, Z is X. 1. I hung up tins, I hung up bats, I hung up pics, I hung up maps. 2. A word of care, a word of vice, a word of fate, a word of life. This example from sample for cipher THE-NOR360. A is I, B is L, C is F, D is S, E is R, F is C, G is P, H is O, I is A, J is X, K is V, L is B, M is Y, N is T, O is H, P is G, Q is Z, R is E, S is D, T is N, U is W, V is K, W is U, X is J, Y is M, Z is Q. 1. The fit germ in vats can find its bard. 2. Nor can prey at kind fit cats and lies. I'll do a few sound poems for your entertainment. I had the very great fortune last summer in August to perform in an opera by R. Murray Schafer, an opera called The Princess of the Stars. R. Murray Schafer is probably our greatest exported composer. This opera is widely considered one of the most difficult to perform in the history of Canadian music because it takes place at 4 o'clock in the morning in the remote reaches of northern Canada on an open lake, and all the action takes place inside giant canoes, decked out to be the characters in these performances. And there's a full orchestra hidden away in the woods in the middle of nowhere. with all of these actants on the lake. It's a kind of living dream that you get to watch in the middle of the night. The story concerns the Princess of the Stars, an allegory for the moon, who falls out of the sky because she has listened too closely to the song of the wolf. And she falls into the lake, where in fact the action takes place, and is abducted by the evil villain, the three-horned enemy. Now, without meaning to do so, the producers actually opened this performance on the very night of the lunar eclipse. And while the opening aria of the soprano occurred, the lunar eclipse began devouring the moon. It was quite a beautiful experience. I was awestruck. Now you have to imagine me playing, of course, the villain in this opera. I described my character as a kind of crazy pirate aboard a psychedelic submarine, barking orders at his crew. You have to imagine them inside this gigantic dragon-like puppet, operating it while I'm performing this particular aria. Now I should note that this aria is never given to an opera singer, because no virtuoso performer would ever risk their voice and their career on such a performance. I'll perform for you now the aria of the three-horned enemy. I apologize for its stentorian excesses.
Encore.
On a slightly more subdued note, I'd like to perform for you this sound poem. It's an alien hymn originally written for a science fiction television show, Gene Roddenberry's Earth Final Conflict. Alas, this particular poem never made it to air. It's entitled Valuvëula. Just a few more poems. This next sound poem is entitled The Doomsday Song. It's for Friedrich Nietzsche upon the death of Superman. It owes a great debt, of course, to the 7-issue miniseries from DC Comics, in which, of course, the hero Superman is killed by the villainous Doomsday. Krum, krum, clackum, clack-a-doom, ka-doom, floom, boom, boom, clack-a-doom, ba-da-doom, choom, ka-choom, ka-doom, shoom, ka-toom, ka-toom, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-toom, clack-a-toom, doom, ba-doom, 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 doom, floom, kloom, clackum, clack-a-doom, ka-doom, foom, foom, boom, clack-a-doom, ba-da-doom, choom, ka-choom, ka-doom, shoom, ka-toom, ka-toom, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-toom, clack-a-toom, doom, ba-doom, 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 doom, kloom, kloom, clackum, clack-a-doom, ka-doom, foom, foom, boom, clack-a-doom, ba-da-doom, choom, ka-choom, ka-doom, shoom, ka-toom, ka-toom, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-toom, clack-a-toom, doom, ba-doom, 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 doom, klum, klum, clackum, clack-a-doom, ka-doom, foom, foom, boom, clack-a-doom, ba-da-doom, choom, ka-choom, ka-doom, shoom, ka-toom, ka-toom, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-toom, clack-a-toom, doom, ba-doom, 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 thoom. Despite being an exponent of the work of Ulipo, I've never actually tried to write a poem using the N+7 method, in which you translate a text, of course, by replacing every noun with a noun 7 nouns ahead of it in the dictionary. But this one seemed to work out, so I'm going to just perform it for you today, given the nature of your current political context. I would say that it constitutes a kind of collision between Tristan Tzara and Ulipo. I've entitled it American Dada. Take a new world order. Take a palace of scooters. Choose an artificial intelligence as long as the pogo stick that you are planning to make. Cut out the artificial intelligence. Then cut out each of the workaholics that make up this artificial intelligence and put them in a baggage handler. Shake gently. Then take out the screens one after the other in the order in which they left the baggage handler. Copy conscientiously. The pogo stick will be like you. And here you are, a wrongdoer, infinitely original and endowed with a separation anxiety that is charming, though beyond the underthings of the vulva. This poem is entitled NOYTA CCCP. Dadaism is a Zamishdat of madness ad nauseum. Nazism is a Zaibatsu of business ad hominem. Zaum noise, my monsoon, I immunize its asthma. MERS rhyme, my rhizome, I memorize its enzyme. Mars, Muzak, Comet, Zoom, cosmonauts own Zurich. Marx Mecca Kamamoon, Communist Ski Munich, a maverick, massivus, my samovar of vacuums, a volatile lavavit, my Molotov of volumes, no vertigo like vodka, the improv of gravity, no volapuk like opera, the pravda of poverty, make codes, my Tsarina commissars of stardom, burn books, by October, troubadours of boredom. We're at that blissful moment in the reading when I'm about to read my penultimate poem. This is a paragraph from chapter U. For Zhu Yu, this chapter from NOYTA concerns, of course, the exploits of Ubu Hubbub, the pea-brained, pot-bellied dictator, made famous, of course, by the French playwright Alfred Jarry. I often get asked to read this particular paragraph. Ubu gulps up brunch, duck, hummus, nuts, fugu, bulgur, buns, crusts plus crumbs, brewwurst, brewwurst, spuds, curds, plums, munch, munch. Ubu sups, Ubu slurps rum punch, Ubu chugs full cups plus mugs, full tubs plus tons, glug, glug. Ubu gluts up grub, thus Ubu's plump gut hurts. Ubu grunts, ugh, ugh. Ubu burps up mucus sputum, Ubu upchucks lunch. Ubu slumps, Ubu sulks, Ubu shrugs. Ubu slurs drunk chums, Ubu snubs such drunks, thus Kirch churls cuss. Shut up, Ubu, shut up. Gruff punks club Ubu, butch thugs drub Ubu, Ku Klux Kults Kung Fu punch Ubu. Rum dum bums, bust up pubs. And finally, on a somewhat political note, I'd like to perform for you a signature work entitled Ubu Hubbub. This poem is, in my mind, the imperial decree of Ubu Roi. And I'd like to perform it this evening on behalf of Senator McCain, who could not be here to do it himself. Ubu Hubbub, blabbering rubber guts, a rutabaga tuba blur, gelatinous kettle drum, cumbersome gummy bears of bourbon. Ubu choo-choo, bungee jump, dung beetle jumbo jets, a jamboree of wombats, jabberwock.